The Tom Woods Show, episode 1479.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, as you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been spreading some pretty terrible ideas, and she's wrong on just about everything. Well, I've put together the definitive smash of all of it. The Green New Deal, affordable housing, so-called, free college, high tax rates. It's in another free ebook, yes, a free ebook called AOC is Wrong, The Upside-Down World of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Grab your free copy at aociswrong.com. Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here, talking a little bit about Sweden today. Now, we've gone over Sweden quite a bit on the show. In fact, I have even considered doing an ebook. You know, I have all these ebooks that I release. I've been thinking of doing one on Sweden and Scandinavia in general, because so many of our folks have to deal with this objection. I think at this point it's become rather a commonplace. It wasn't anything I remember having to deal with growing up, let's say, in the 80s and being in college in the 90s. But since that time, the idea of Sweden as a model of government intervention has just overwhelmed political discourse, really, because anytime you have a complaint about government intervention, you get told that Sweden has plenty of it and look at how great they're doing. So we've had to respond to that in one way or another. And one way of doing that has been to point out, for example, that actually Sweden started off fairly free market, and that in the mid-20th century, you can see in the statistics that there was a smaller percentage of GDP spent by the government in Sweden than in the United States, and that it was in the 1960s and 1970s that the welfare state really just went off the charts, and that after that, there were some consequences that were not so good. And so the way Johan Norberg puts it is, he reminds us of the old joke, how do you get a small fortune? You start with a large fortune and you whittle it away. And so he says that's, so Sweden looks like it's pretty prosperous. Okay, when you start off, in fact, it's quite similar actually to the arguments that Umberto Fontova made on this program about Cuba, where we hear all these claims about the accomplishments of communism, but he points out Cuba was already doing so well by the time the communists took over that even after they did their damage, it might still look halfway decent. But that doesn't mean they made it do well. It was doing even better. So anyway, there's a lot that can be said in this regard. We can also note that if you look at Swedes who come to the U.S., and it's not a matter of, well, only the smart Swedes come to the U.S., and so it's a self-selected group. If you look at Swedes who come to the U.S., they earn about 50% more than Swedes who stay in Sweden. These are the same people, just different institutional setting. The Swedes basically seem to do well no matter where they are and what the system they're living under is. But if they wind up in an even freer system, they do even better, is the point. There's a lot of other stuff that could be said as well. I mean, for years and years and years after the real explosion of the welfare state, there were no net private sector jobs created in Sweden. I mean, there's a lot that you can say about it. But one approach that libertarians have taken is to say that actually Sweden is not all that socialistic, in the colloquial sense. I mean, obviously, traditional socialism is collective ownership of the means of production, and we don't have that in Sweden, obviously, but the word socialism has come to have a broader meaning in colloquial use. So a lot of times people will say Sweden is socialist, but what they really mean is that it's heavily interventionist. And so what some people will say is it is still, after all, a capitalist country. There isn't state ownership of the means of production or anything. And in some ways, like the regulatory burden or corporate taxes or whatever, it's actually not really so bad. So this is a way for libertarians to say, so you see, we really have nothing to explain away, because after all, Sweden really is just a capitalist country. And at the urging of somebody in my private Facebook group, the Tom Woods Show Elite, which you can't even see. It's actually a secret group, so you can't even see that. If you do a search for that, you ain't going to find it. I got to put you in there if you want to be in there. And let me tell you something. You do want to be in there. Okay, this is where it's at. So you want to be in there, go over to supportinglisteners.com. You can also get if you're at the silver level or above, you can get the debate I did with Bob Murphy. Oh boy, there's the video of that debate. In fact, you know what? At the end of this episode, I'm going to play you some excerpts from that debate. Okay, I'm going to play you some fun excerpts from that debate. Anyway, so we'll get to that. Anyway, let's get back to Sweden. So anyway, at the urging of somebody in my private group, I read a series of blog posts on a blog called Larsen's Political Economy, and it's written by a PhD named Sven Larsen. And I will link to this blog and these posts at tomwoods.com/1479. They're just called Socialism in Sweden, and it's parts 1 through 3. And he's arguing that libertarians, and I think he's right, and maybe for all I know, maybe I'm guilty of this too. I actually don't remember what I've said on this over the years, but maybe if I look back on it, I would cringe. I don't know for sure, okay? But I want to warn you that it's quite possible that your host here has been guilty of this. I hope not quite as over the top as some of these folks, but he's saying that libertarians are way overdoing this particular approach of, oh, look, Sweden is basically a robustly capitalist country. In fact, he quotes a libertarian professor, I'm not going to say his name, but as saying that, quote, Sweden is one of the most robustly capitalist nations on earth. And then Larsen goes on to just take this apart. He says, well, Sweden has among the world's highest taxes, and he says Sweden has the world's highest taxes, and he says an EITC, meaning Earned Income Tax Credit style deduction, makes it look like the world's second highest taxes, yet it's still one of the most robustly capitalist nations on earth. And he says, in order to pull this off, our professor here has to use a crafty, homemade definition of capitalism: largely private ownership, market-based prices, and an economy free of, quote, coercion. And Larsen says, well, all right, if you're going to talk about largely private ownership, are you saying a person's personal income is not private property? Because if it is, then the exorbitant intrusion on it by Swedish income taxes, you would think, would undermine the claim that there's largely private ownership in Sweden. Then we get this. This is, again, Larsen quoting a libertarian professor describing Sweden. If you think Sweden is socialist, then you know something that just ain't so. As has been documented repeatedly by popular treatments and more scholarly discussions, any use of the actual measures of economic freedom that constitute capitalism shows Sweden is solidly in the camp of fully market-oriented economies. And then he goes on to say that it's inconceivable to think of the Sweden of the current decade as being anything other than a capitalist and, in fact, libertarian country. So Larsen is about to pull his hair out looking at this analysis. He says, this is a country with a single-payer, tax-funded healthcare system. That's libertarian. He says, school choice here is conditional on approval of private schools from local school districts. Local school districts, in effect, have the right to stop private schools. Private schools are barred from charging tuition. The government runs almost all elderly care. This is libertarian. Income tax rates start above 30% and top out above 60%, and then add payroll taxes, which are very high in Sweden. In fact, there's a whole post dedicated, at least largely, to going through the Swedish tax system. You won't believe it. That's part 2 of the 3-part series. You just won't believe it. It would be boring for me to go through all the specifics, so I'm just going to link to that post at tomwoods.com/1479, but it's pretty terrible. Then he wants to know, how can we say a country is libertarian when it's as dominated by unions, or at least where, in principle, every private industry is subject to union contracts, and unions have semi-government status. So unions can shut down a business by just blockading all aspects of its operation if it refuses to sign a union contract. If you don't sign in with the union, then every other union that is remotely related to your business will be called in to work together to basically grind your business to a halt. So forget garbage collection, forget office cleaning, anything like that. Your checks being processed at the bank, that's what's going to happen to you. Larsen then quotes our libertarian professor as saying that Sweden has a 100% universal voucher system for education, and it's one of the most private education systems in the world. This is not true. Denmark is the country that has the system being described there, not Sweden. And so we've already talked about local school districts being able to stop private schools banned from charging tuition. There is a national curriculum that every school has to abide by. And he then says, I encourage this professor to go to Sweden and try to start a Christian school. And when he's been denied the right to do that, he can try homeschooling. It won't be long before the police show up at his door, yanking the kids out of his home to forcefully enroll them in the local school. How's that for a private education system? And then he says, and while we're at it, can this professor please list all the privately owned, funded, and operated colleges and universities in Sweden? All right, now let's look at some other figures. Let's actually look at some real statistics about government spending in particular that tell us, again, something about the size of the state relative to the rest of the economy. So we have data from 2015 which show us that total government in the U.S. spent, all levels, spent 37.9% of GDP and took in 33.9%, in taxes and other revenue. But in Sweden, the numbers were 49.6 and 49.8. So he again mocks the professor for calling Sweden robustly capitalist. So in this robustly capitalist economy, Sweden, the government of Sweden confiscates about half the economy and then redistributes it according to its own agenda, ideological agenda. So then he lists various areas of government spending. So housing and urban development, healthcare, cultural, religious, and recreational activities, education, social protection. And these figures add up to about 70% of all government spending. So 70% is for purposes that by any definition would be thought of as being socialistic. He then introduces an interesting number that again helps us gauge this stuff. And what we have is something called the Government Employment Ratio, the GER, which basically gives you a ratio of government employees to private sector employees. What we have in 2014, because that's the latest year we have the statistic for, we have a GER in Sweden of 408. So what that number means is that for every 1,000 employees in the private sector, there are 408 government employees. For the United States, the GER in that year was 187. And that's even when you add up federal, state, and local government employees, you get 187. But in Sweden, it's 408. All right, now in a minute, I want to sum up the argument, and then I want to share with you some excerpts from my debate with Bob Murphy aboard the Contra Cruise. Bob and I had an Oxford-style debate, and I've got some clips for you that I think you're going to enjoy. But before we do that, I want to remind you there have been numerous times in the history of the Tom Woods Show in which I have drawn you out of your comfort zone. I've recommended books you didn't think you were going to like, and you loved them. I've covered topics you thought would be boring, and now you can't get enough of them. I've had guests on you never heard before, now you're their number one fan. All right? That's just the way I am. I can't help it, right? I'm just a font of goodness. But here I'm going to be potentially pulling you out of your comfort zone yet again. But I want you to trust me the way you've trusted me on, Scott Horton's a good guest, right? Trust me on that. Well, I was right about that. Well, likewise, you may hear me say you should try the Simple Habit meditation app, and you're thinking, this is too woo-woo for me. I don't do this kind of thing. But give it a shot. There is nobody listening to this show who does not deal with some level of stress or does not struggle with problems of various sorts from time to time. And you're going to try this because you trust Woods here. And you're going to say, doggone it, that guy has improved my life yet again. Because I've been doing it myself. And I'm absolutely delighted with the results. With Simple Habit, which is 2018 Google Play Award winner for Standout Wellbeing app, you get short meditations you can consume in 5 minutes while you're washing the dishes or walking around or something. So it's made for people who are on the go. And these are meditations that help you with specific problems. This is not about meditating in general and why it's good for you in general. It's actually very specific in how it helps you. There's a reason this app has over 65,000 5-star reviews. Within Simple Habit, you get hundreds of meditations for free and thousands with the premium subscription. And in fact, my listeners can take 30% off that premium subscription when they go to simplehabit.com/woods. That's 30% off the premium subscription when you go to simplehabit.com/woods. You're going to do this. You're going to be surprised at the results. And you're going to come to me and say, Woods, thank you for this recommendation of simplehabit.com/woods. And I will say to you, you are welcome. All right, so let's summarize the argument that Larson is making. It's this, and this is his summary. Sweden has a big fat government that spends half the economy. Taxes are oppressively high. The high taxes are the result of an excessive ambition to redistribute income, and as a result, private consumption suffers, forcing households to go deep into debt. The growth they have comes from exports. The Swedish economy is running on fumes. The crash, not far away, is going to be brutal. Ultimately, it is all thanks to their socialist ambitions. So he's saying this is the correct way to conceive of and talk about the economy of Sweden. And this certainly complements a lot of other approaches to this topic, and it obviously is a corrective to one particular approach. I think it's very valuable material, and you're going to want to look in more detail at the posts that I've been talking to you about. So once again, I will link to those at tomwoods.com/1479, our show notes page for today. Now, I now want to take a few minutes and play for you some excerpts from my debate with Bob Murphy on pacifism. And it was a great, fun debate, Oxford-style debate. And what I'm really doing is taking the audio of a YouTube video of excerpts that we posted on YouTube. Now, we took that video down because I realized that I had forgotten to include one of the really good excerpts, and I was so upset about that. So I said, I actually want to take this whole video down, put that excerpt in, upload it back up again. So it's back up slightly longer with a bit that I would have been sad to be without. So I will have the whole video of these excerpts at tomwoods.com/1479 also. But here comes the audio. And if these clips whet your appetite for the entire debate, afterward, I will tell you how to get your grubby hands on that whole video. Here we go.
And you tell me which side of this rings true to you as being the side of justice. 6 years old, I had a big wheel. The big wheel has a removable plastic seat. And there was a little witch in my neighborhood. She was a couple years older than I was, and she stole everybody's stuff all the time. And she had this witch cackle as she was stealing it. So she stole my big wheel, and she's riding away cackling. She's got my big wheel. And I finally thought, this ends today. I chased her. I caught up to her. I pulled out that removable seat, and I smashed that little over the head. Now, if you're a normal person like me, that is the very epitome of justice. If you're Bob, you think the witch suffered an injustice. If you're for witches, side with Bob.
So Tom's a tough guy. He'll punch a little girl, but he won't actually stand up. So yes, if you want to vote for what we're doing right now, endorsing and vote with me. If you want to beat up little girls, vote with Tom. Thank you. Not only do we not initiate aggression, not only do we not use violence against innocent people, let me show you that actually we could survive and it would be fine if we didn't use violence even against violent people. And moreover, I think not only would we be fine, but we'd be prosper relative to Tom's society he's going to describe for you. And on top of that, can't we all agree that this would be a better way to do it? They think that pacifism is this real wishy-washy and just, oh man, I don't like to hurt people, and it's not, it's just like emotional, and it's not real hardcore, real politics. You know, the war hawks, they're the ones that sit down and really think things through. They know how the world works. They're not naive, and that's not the case. There's plenty of examples of people who adopt strategies and tactics of nonviolent resistance. So they're not doormats. They're not Ned Flanders. Hey, you're going to tax me? Okay. That's not what they're doing.
It seems to me there is a moral confusion at the heart of pacifism. It seems as if we're being told that confining an innocent child and confining a serial rapist are really the same thing because they both involve confinement, as if it's the confinement per se rather than the moral status of the parties that should concern us. Likewise, the idea that violence itself must be immoral, regardless of the circumstances, such that punching and restraining a serial rapist is separated perhaps only by degrees from punching and restraining a small child, seems to contradict every moral instinct we have.
Leo Tolstoy, the author of War and Peace, understands there's violent people out there, and yet Tolstoy became a pacifist. He inspired Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Okay, so it wasn't because Tolstoy was ignorant of the fact that there's violent people out there. He saw the world as it was. Again, reading War and Peace, he understands humans very well, and yet he realized that, okay, maybe there's a better way to deal with this.
Now look, Bob Murphy's a very fine person. He's got many clever arguments. Chances are you voted against the resolution like me, and you're going to be tempted to change your vote because you hear Bob's clever arguments and you think, well, Bob deserves my vote because he made me think, and maybe his ideas aren't as destructive of civilization as I thought. And you're also being pushed in the direction of voting for the resolution by thinking, doggone it, isn't it about time Bob Murphy won a debate for a change? Why should Woods win all the time, you know? Let's give this to Bob as some kind of an honorary recognition of his contributions to the liberty movement. And, and speaking of which, while we're at it, maybe Bob could be recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Austrian Economic Center in Vienna this year. Oh wait, that's me winning that award, I'm sorry. I'm getting that award. That's not
All right, folks, that was that. So, you want to hear that whole video? You want to watch the video of that debate? Here's how you get it. Go to supportinglisteners.com and support the Tom Woods Show at least the silver level, and that video is delivered to you instantly. That is to say, you have instant access to it the very next second, and you'll enjoy it. We had good fun. Everybody on board enjoyed it. Bob was the winner by the Oxford-style rules, I will tell you that. But you just ask yourself, who debated more elegantly? Right? I mean, isn't that really the question we should be asking ourselves? So head over to supportinglisteners.com. You've been meaning to do it anyway, but this is just going to push you right over the fence there, over into the Tom Woods Show elite. So supportinglisteners.com is where to go, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit TomWoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Like the sound of the Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.